Greetings and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host and producer, Kilu Nyasha, and at the board is Jackie Perez. Today we're going to have a slightly different show without a guest. It's going to be a few clips. You're going to hear from the wonderful journalist, Australian journalist John Pilger, and you're going to hear from Boots Riley and the Coup with a Segway hip hop number. And I'm going to kick it off with excerpts from an article I just wrote, and it's on my blog spot: Boycott the Election and Start the Revolution. The vast majority of Americans, regardless of background or ethnicity, agree that this electoral campaign gives us no choice but to vote for someone we don't like or want to govern us. The perennial lesser evil has become more malevolent, even ridiculous, in the current presidential election. Some folks want to hold their noses and vote for the lesser evil in the belief that one will be worse than the other. However, we've been doing just that for at least 50 years. That's why we've become to this level of corrupt silliness, with candidates Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump dodging the issues and reducing the process to trivialities, backbiting, and nonsense. The reality is that these races have become selections, not elections. No one who is not obscenely rich or has the backing of such can run for president, let alone win office. A big money game. The New York Times reported, quote, the political network overseen by the conservative billionaires Charles and David Koch plans to spend close to $900 million on the 2016 campaign, an unparalleled effort by coordinated outside groups to shape a presidential election that is already on track to be the most expensive in history. The last election, I think the total amount was something like 11 billion, with a B. Bloomberg View reports undisclosed dark money is generally funneled by big donors to politically active nonprofits that claim they operate for social welfare. Many such groups sprang up after a series of court rulings, especially Citizens United, that okayed unlimited spending by corporations, unions, and individuals. Spending on Senate races by groups that don't discuss donors doubled between 2010 and 2014, from 105 million to 226 million. In the 10 most competitive Senate races last year, almost 60% of independent expenditures were made by non-disclosing groups, according to the Brennan Center. Others say they'll vote for third-party candidates, but the only third party to get on the ballot in all 50 states is the Libertarian Party, with the backing of 10% of registered voters, according to the Pew poll. But their candidate, Gary Johnson, still can't get on the stage. The Green candidates, Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka, have polled at about 3%. Not only can they not get in the debates or garner mass media attention, their party must work within the confines of a corrupt electoral process that forces them to engage in nonstop fundraising, albeit not from the corporate oligarchy. It's been repeatedly proven that a third party cannot win within this system. That's been the case for a myriad of elections and contradicts the revolutionary principle of fighting battles you can win. It demoralizes people to always lose. As George Jackson noted in Blood in My Eye, quote, all political parties as things stand will support the power complex. The fascists already have power. The point is that some way must be found to expose them and combat them. This is a huge nation, dominated by the most reactionary and violent ruling class in the history of the world, where the majority of the people just simply cannot understand that they are existing on the misery and discomfort of the world, unquote. In fact, we Americans are hated more and more as President Barack Obama targets innocent civilians with drones, composes kill lists for massacres and assassinations, supports fascist dictatorships like Saudi Arabia, military occupations such as the Zionist occupation of Palestine and the UN occupation of Haiti, escalating militarism across the globe, including AFRICOM, in his progressive pillaging of global resources and dangerous confrontations with Russia. We are hated because we claim to democratically elect these imperialist warmongers and thereby bear full responsibility for our ongoing atrocities against other peoples in sovereign nations. And I'm going to stop there and go to a clip of John Pilger talking about the system.
In 2009, President Obama stood before an adoring crowd in the center of Prague, in the center of Europe, and he pledged himself to make, and I quote, the world free from nuclear weapons. People cheered and some cried. A torrent of platitudes flowed from the media. Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It was all fake. He was lying. The Obama administration almost immediately launched a program to build more nuclear weapons, more nuclear warheads, more nuclear delivery systems, more nuclear factories. Nuclear warhead spending alone rose higher under Obama than under any other American president. The cost over 30 years is estimated at $1 trillion. A mini nuclear bomb is planned. It's known as the B-61 Model 12. Sounds like a Volkswagen. There's never been anything like it. One of America's top generals, General James Cartwright, the former head of the Strategic Air Command, has said, and I quote him, "Going smaller makes this nuclear weapon more thinkable." In the last 18 months, the greatest build-up of military forces since World War II, led by the United States, is taking place along Russia's western frontier. Not since Hitler invaded the Soviet Union have foreign troops presented such a demonstrable threat to Russia. Ukraine, once part of the Soviet Union, has become a CIA theme park. Having orchestrated a coup in Kiev, Washington effectively controls a regime that's next door and hostile to Russia, a regime rotten with Nazis, literally. Prominent parliamentary figures in the Ukraine are the political descendants of the notorious anti-Semitic OUN and a UPA fascists. They openly praise Hitler and call for the persecution and expulsion of the Russian-speaking minority. That's not what you read, of course, in the news. In Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, on Russia's frontier, the US military is permanently deploying combat troops, tanks, weapons. Now, this extreme provocation of the world's second nuclear power, Russia, is met with silence in the West, especially in Australia, the most silent of all, the land of willful ignorance. What makes the prospect of nuclear war even more dangerous is a parallel campaign, propaganda campaign, against China. Seldom a day passes when China is not elevated to the status of a threat. Count the American admirals who fly in with their scare stories about China. Each has given unctuous, uncritical front-page treatment. According to Admiral Harry Harris, the Pacific commander, China is, and I quote, building a great wall of sand in the South China Sea. What he's referring to is China building airstrips in the Spratly Islands, which are the subject of a dispute with the Philippines, a dispute of little consequence until Washington pressured and bribed the government in Manila, and Admiral Harris launched a propaganda campaign called Freedom of Navigation. What does this mean? It means freedom for American warships to patrol and intimidate and dominate the coastal waters of China. Try to imagine the American reaction if Chinese warships did the same off the coast of California. I made a film called The War You Don't See, in which I interviewed distinguished journalists in America and Britain, reporters such as Dan Rather of CBS, Raggy Omar, the BBC, David Rose of The Observer. All of them said that had journalists and broadcasters done their job and questioned the propaganda that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, had they not amplified and echoed the lies of George W. Bush and Tony Blair, the invasion of Iraq might not have happened, and hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children would be alive today. The propaganda laying the ground for a war against Russia and China is no different in principle, but a lot more dangerous. Name a single journalist in Australia, an academic, a politician of any party, who has publicly and vociferously asked why China is building airstrips in the South China Sea. The answer ought to be glaringly obvious. The United States is encircling China with a network of bases, ballistic missiles, battle groups, nuclear-armed bombers. This lethal arc extends from right here in Australia to the islands of the Pacific, the Marianas, the Marshalls and Guam, to the Philippines, Thailand, Okinawa, Korea, and right across Eurasia to Afghanistan and India and Pakistan. Look at the map. America has hung a noose around the neck of China. Australia, in America's pocket, is beckoning war with our greatest trading partner. Incredibly, none of this is news. Censorship by omission, silence by media, then war by media. In 2015, in high secrecy, Washington and Canberra staged the biggest single air-sea military exercise in history, known as Talisman Sabre. Its aim was to rehearse an air-sea battle plan, blocking sea lanes such as the Straits of Malacca and the Lombok Straits that cut off China's access to oil, gas, and other vital materials from the Middle East and Africa. Silence. In the circus known as the American presidential campaign, Donald Trump is being presented as a lunatic, a fascist. He's certainly odious, but he's also a media hate figure, and that alone should arouse our skepticism. Trump's views on migration are grotesque, but no more grotesque than those of David Cameron or Tony Abbott or a couple of serving ministers in the current Turnbull government. It's not Trump who is the great deporter of people from the United States, but the Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama. According to one respected liberal commentator, Trump is, and I quote, unleashing the dark forces of violence in America. Unleashing dark forces? Really? Is he kidding? This is the country where toddlers shoot their mothers and the police wage a murderous war against black Americans. This is the country that has attacked and sought to overthrow more than 50 governments, many of them democracies, and bombed from Asia to the Middle East, causing the deaths of untold numbers of people. No country can equal this record of violence. It's systemic. And most of America's wars against defenseless countries have been launched not by Republican presidents, the Trumps, but by liberal Democrats, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, Carter, Clinton, Obama. In 1947, a series of National Security Council directives described the paramount aim of American foreign policy as, and I quote, a world substantially made over in America's own image, unquote. The ideology was messianic Americanism. We were all Americans, or else. Heretics will be converted, subverted, bribed, smeared, or done away with. Donald Trump is undoubtedly a symptom of this, but he's also a maverick. He said the invasion of Iraq was a crime. He doesn't want to go to war with Russia and China. How ironic. The danger to the rest of humanity is not Trump, in my view, but Hillary Clinton. She is no maverick. She embodies the resilience and violence of a system whose vaunted exceptionalism is a form of fascism with an occasional liberal face. As election day draws near, Clinton will be hailed as the first female president, regardless of her crimes and lies. Just as Barack Obama was lauded as the first black president and liberals swallowed his drivel about hope. And the drool goes on, described by The Guardian columnist Owen Jones as, quote, funny, charming, with a coolness that eludes practically every other politician, unquote. Obama the other day sent drones to slaughter 150 people in Somalia. He kills people frequently, usually on Tuesdays, according to the New York Times, when he's handed a list for death by drone. That's cool. In the last presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton threatened, and I quote, to totally obliterate Iran with nuclear weapons. As Secretary of State under Obama, she approved the overthrow of the democratic government of Honduras. Her almost gleeful destruction of Libya in 2011 qualifies her as a Class A war criminal. When the Libyan leader, Colonel Gaddafi, was publicly sodomized with a knife, a murder made possible by American logistics, Clinton gloated over his death. He came, he saw, he died. One of her closest allies is Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, who has attacked young women for not supporting Clinton. This is the same Madeleine Albright who once celebrated the death of 500,000 Iraqi children as, quote, worth it. Clinton's biggest backers are the Israel lobby and the arms companies that fuel the violence in the Middle East. She and her husband have taken millions of dollars from Wall Street. She's corrupt and violent, and yet she's about to be ordained the women's candidate to see off the evil Trump, the official demon. She's backed by distinguished feminists, Gloria Steinem in the US, Ann Summers in Australia. A generation ago, a postmodern cult, now known as identity politics, stopped many intelligent, liberal-minded people examining the causes and individuals they supported, such as the fakery of Obama and Clinton, such as specious progressive movements like Syriza in Greece, which portrayed the people of that country and allied with their enemies. Self-absorption, a kind of meism, became the new zeitgeist in privileged Western societies and signaled the death of great collective movements against war, against social justice, against equality, against racism and sexism. Today, the long sleep may be over. The young seem to be stirring again, slowly, gradually. The thousands in Britain who supported Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader are part of this awakening, as are those who rallied to support Bernie Sanders. Was that it? In Britain last week, Jeremy Corbyn's closest ally, his shadow treasurer, John McDonnell, committed a Labour government to pay off the debts of piratical banks and to continue so-called austerity. No real change there. In the US, Bernie Sanders has promised to support Clinton if or when she's nominated. He too has voted for America's use of violence against countries when he thinks it's right. He says Obama has done a great job. No real change there. In Australia, we have a kind of mortuary politics in which barren parliamentary games are played out in the media while refugees and Indigenous people are persecuted and inequality grows, along with the danger of war. The Turnbull government has just announced the so-called defence budget of $195 billion. That is a drive to war. There was no debate, none. Silence. Why? In Australia, as in most Western countries, there's now a permanent government with two main competing factions whose social, economic and foreign policies are almost identical. Elections are now theatrical episodes in which copycat policies are ratified. As in war by media and silence by media, we now have democracy by media, and that's fake too. What has happened to the great tradition of popular direct action? Where is the courage, political imagination and commitment required to begin the long journey to a better, just and peaceful world? Where are the acclaimed artists, writers, playwrights, filmmakers in Australia? Perhaps enjoying their federal and state government prizes and patronage. For they're silent too. Of course, there are very honourable exceptions, including those who sponsored this meeting tonight and those who have fought tenaciously for justice, for refugees, and those who fought tenaciously for justice for Indigenous people, and those who last week exposed the Baird government's attacks on the right to protest and of free speech. What they showed was that real dissent is becoming a crime. And that is the challenge for everyone here tonight. They, governments, elites, those who seek to control our lives, must not get away with it. Break the silence, or do we wait until the first nuclear missile is fired? Thank
you. And again, that was the investigative journalist John Pilger speaking at an event in Australia a conference, I believe, last spring, and focusing on the election here, or the nominations. So I'm going to continue with my paper, Boycott the Election and Start the Revolution. So, beginning with a quote from George Jackson: "When any election is held, it will fortify rather than destroy the credibility of the power brokers. When we participate in this election to win instead of disrupt, we're lending to its credibility and destroying our own. With all the factors of control over the electoral process in the hands of the minority ruling class, the People's Party can always be made to seem isolated, unimportant, even extraneous," unquote. The People's Parties, the Green Party, Peace and Freedom Party, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Freedom Socialist Party, are all rendered extraneous and unimportant. Yet they are the parties that have platforms to address the enormous problems of climate change, gross inequality and income disparities, homelessness, health care, mass incarceration, racism, sexism, and homophobia. We abolished chattel slavery, but the 13th Amendment and our own lack of unified resistance permits neo-slavery or wage slavery behind or outside of prison walls. Under chattel slavery, when we were the property of the obscenely rich, it was in their interest to take care of us. Now we've become throwaways, paid unlivable salaries under awful conditions, and laid off with no compensation or safety net, subjected to premature death. We don't have a one person, one vote electoral process. The framers opted for a complex system of delegates called the Electoral College to ensure the outcome of elections would favor the owner elites. Each state would have a number of electors equal to the number of representatives in the House, plus their 2 senators. Whoever wins the most votes in a given state gets all the electoral votes, a winner-take-all ballot in which voters cast their ballots for the candidates of their choice indirectly. In practice, they're really signaling their vote to a slew of unknown delegates who in turn are supposed to honor the vote a month later at the Electoral College. This process literally discards all the losing votes in each and every state, giving more power to the small, largely white, states and putting a check on the power of the majority people of color. For example, in Wyoming, it takes 167,000 votes to gain a single electoral vote. In California, it takes at least 645,000 to get one electoral vote, giving the Wyoming voter 4 times the voting power of a Californian. Then, let's say 1 million voters in California split their votes between the 2 candidates at 49 to 51%. The 49% of voters, or close to 500,000 votes, would be discounted. Repeat this process in 50 states, and the number of votes discarded is mind-boggling. Yet we continually hear the propaganda that every vote counts. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, 4 presidents were elected after losing the popular vote. A number of polls found at least 70% of the American population favors abolishing the Electoral College. I think that percentage would be 99% if all eligible voters clearly understood it. Black folks often say, "We fought and died for the right to vote." Yes, we have. We've always been on the front lines of struggle in this country. From Sojourner Truth to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Fannie Lou Hamer, and all the valiant freedom fighters of the Civil Rights Movement, we honor and revere their uncompromising fight for our right to vote. However, while we got a Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, the reactionaries in power initiated new ways to suppress and vacate our vote. New rules and laws of redistricting, registration procedures, vote tampering, rigged voting machines, denying prisoners and felons the right to vote, and ID policies to disenfranchise voters, especially those of color. Eric Nielsen writes that since 2010, 11 states have passed laws that make it more difficult to vote. The Sentencing Project reports that 6.1 million people are now barred from voting because of a felony conviction, about 3% of the total population, compared with 13% of adult black men. I wonder what the tally would be if black women were included. Here we are 50 years ago after the beginning of the civil rights movement, and we actually have an increasing number of African Americans who are disenfranchised each year, said Mark Maurer of the Sentencing Project. In 17 states, the estimated percentage of disenfranchised black men is even higher. The figure is 31% in Florida and Alabama. In Mississippi, it's 29% and 25% in Virginia. Those 4 states impose a lifetime ban on voting by felons. The other 5 states with lifetime bans are Iowa, Kentucky, Nevada, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Such a racist, classist phenomenon in the voting system practically screams for our resistance in the slogan, all of us or none. All of us or none. And with that, I want to go to a musical break with Boots Riley and the Cool, and it's titled Dig It.
Presto, read the Communist Manifesto, gorillas in the midst of Guevara and Manesto. So,
what a brother with an afro now.
Yo, Noah flow for the Mac, and we the hoes so grow, cause the Lynching brothers might get hung. Rhetoric flowing from the tip of my mouth, say tongue deficit.
Money spit,
catch the glint.
On my 9 as they cut welfare, 25%.
And I dissent as I clench and raise my
We
fist.
did away with that.
So you could get with this, it's a twist, cause we'll overthrow like Kwame and Kuma. Spread around the world as if it were a vicious rumor. Bam, cuts a record like a surgeon cuts a tumor from a brain.
We're all cooped up, so feel the pain.
From 400 years of exploitation, anesthesia provided by your local TV station. Patience is not a virtue.
I ain't waiting.
Turn it over like Bush did a boatload of hate. How now, brown down, down with the Mau Mau clown downtown, try to put us in a dog pound like A-Trap Brown with the situation.
Won't get no calluses,
Cause we're spitting dialectical analysis. So how is this? We never had no funk until you found out that our trunks are revolutionary, huh?
Chump.
Bump you over like dominoes, rat.
So free Geronimo, Jaga Pratt.
Lyrics, hear it, lyric, can't get near it. Got a sample, didn't clear it. Point blank says 5-0, that's the spirit. Cheer it. Spat out the fat that I consumed. Knew that I was doomed since my date of birth to be the wretched of the earth. Never had a dream that was American.
They go to like a Cherokee.
Disparaging.
But that ain't nothing new.
Told the streets where they would go. Whoever paved that got minimum wage too.
Do you understand the metaphoric phrase? Do you understand the metaphoric phrase? Do you understand the metaphoric phrase? Do you understand? Do you understand?
Gundus.
Exploited and they hung us. I'd like to take a moment to say Columbus.
Millions off my
The
back.
black on black crisis is a myth. The crack that did the
What's
damage.
the one from the whip?
The record skip, the record skip, the record skip. The record skips cause my voice is kinda scratchy. From yelling don't you when 5-0 comes to harass me. They never passed me, no one to go and tell, bro.
Trying to kill the movement with the new COINTEL, bro.
Leaders they killed, if I said it, it was granted them. They only see my back because I'm 3 steps ahead of them. We're not falling in the slot, just slated.
We realize that our power is nickel plated.
Masses move as well as actors do. Class is through, our time is over past this due.
And you still wanna
The
know.
origin of the flow, Oakland, California, 9 for 6, 1 up.
Yeah, the coup coming at you in 93.
Yeah, and we out, y'all.
And for those of you who are not familiar with the Mau Mau, they were Kenyan African freedom fighters who had liberated Kenya, uh, uh, back in uh, 60s, around that time. Anyway, when Africa was fighting for independence from the colonial powers. In a Truth Out article dated May 2015, Brian D. Williams wrote an article titled Electoral Boycott as a Revolutionary Tactic. So I'm not alone. Quote, voting reinforces the legitimacy of the current system, propping up the status quo and its extensive list of policy problems. Even a vote for a minor party candidate while expressing preference for radical policy reform is effectively a vote of approval for the current electoral system and structure of government. A campaign for electoral boycott avoids this pitfall. It would probably do more to build a revolutionary It would probably do more to build revolutionary momentum than pursuing change via the ballot box. Widespread support for Sanders and Trump campaigns, whose effect, if not intent, has been to preclude revolution by weaving disaffected voters back into the two-party system, are among several signs of this. However, simply staying away from the polling stations isn't enough. To gain the most momentum from the current moment, the boycott should be advanced as part of a longer-term movement for systemic revolutionary change. I think unquote. I think it's high time for us to form a united front against fascism, or on a more positive tip, a united front for social revolution. Remember, Bernie Sanders was talking about a social revolutionary in his campaign for the nomination, which of course he didn't get, and then pretty much betrayed the social revolution by backing up Hillary Clinton. However, he did popularize the idea, and he made it, and for the first time I can remember, socialism was no longer a dirty word in the mainstream discourse. So that was a step forward and a step in the right direction. I think we need to take it further and pick up on where Bernie Sanders left off, and really organize, and build a movement, a revolutionary movement for the social revolution. If the small parties can come together and fight the reactionary duopoly, we could effectively begin the task of organizing the 99% to save the planet and our grandchildren. Our grandchildren have no future whatsoever in lieu of climate change and the militarism of the government per se. And it's not going to change with either of these nominees. It's not going to change. It's going to get worse. So we really have to move. And I'll quote George again. A social revolution after the fact of the modern corporate capitalist state can only mean the breakup of that state and a completely new form of economics and culture, unquote. And then the final quote is, settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation, understand that fascism is already here, that people are dying who could be saved, that generations more will live poor, butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. That's George Lester Jackson. And he wrote 2 books, which I would encourage you to read. The first book that was a 1970 bestseller, Soledad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson. And his second book, Blood in My Eye, was published after his death or posthumously. And it's well worth the read. In fact, it's banned in the prisons. Both books are banned in the prison. His name is banned behind the walls. So he's very much kept away from the public because of his very revolutionary positions and opinions, and he was martyred because of his revolutionary organizing. And so I just want to encourage you to, that regardless as to what you do on November 8th, I hope you will listen to your conscience. I hope that you will understand the reality of our situation, and I hope that you will make a commitment to change. And change can only come about if each individual decides to change. And collectively, we will be a community of change. And we must organize around people around their basic needs. Like right now, people are in the street and homeless, and for goodness sakes, we should be organizing every day to house the homeless, to figure out ways, whatever we have to do, to make sure that people have a roof over their heads. It's just that basic. There's so many people who are hungry, so we can organize to feed people. We can organize to take care of children. Child care is prohibitively expensive, so we can organize child care among our neighbors in our communities. However, we need to, any way that we can, we need to reach out to our neighbors, reach out to our co-workers, and begin to talk, to start a dialogue on how we can really impact this system and begin to change it. And I'm talking about radical change. And since we have some more minutes left, I want to talk to you a little bit, and I found an article to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in North Dakota and the standoff at Standing Rock. So this piece was it was dated Tuesday, November 1st. Water protectors jailed in dog kennels assigned numbers as concentration camps. Here's some of the kind of criminal behavior on the part of the government that's happening right now. Water protectors caged in dog kennels after arrests on Thursday, October 27th. Numbers were written on their arms, as was done in concentration camps. Morton County Sheriff Kyle Kirchmeyer caged Standing Rock water protectors in dog kennels and wrote numbers on their arms, as was done in concentration camps. After being caged in a dog kennel and assigned a number as in the Nazi concentration camps, this water protector in the video above describes the heartbreak of the brutal police attack and arrests of Native American elders on October 27th. Quote, "They are good, strong people of our community," she said of the Native elders brutally arrested by police and National Guard. Dakota Access Pipeline is violating all human rights and civil rights as it rushes to complete the last stretch of pipeline construction. She describes the heartbreak of ceremonial bundles on the ground and elders being arrested with their eagle feathers in their hair. No one had guns or anything, she said, describing facing the tear gas, sound cannons, percussion grenades, pepper spray, and loaded assault weapons pointed at them. She describes how the people stood up to the tear gas and the brutality inflicted on them that day as they defended the sacred places, burial places, and sacred water of the Missouri River. Then the water protectors, elders, and youth were taken in buses to jail. We were caged in dog kennels. We sat on the floor. We were marked with numbers. We were held in the garage. They put the women in 2 dog kennels covered with tarps in the garage. They could not see out. She said she could not wrap her mind around it. Water protectors had numbers written on their arms. Morton County Sheriff and the violent police and National Guard engaged in torture, in which they placed a hood over a water protector during a lockdown to protect the water and burial places. These violent police further engaged in torture by pouring water over handcuffed water protectors in the cold. So here again, we have a case where the people are protesting the the oil companies' pipeline, and who's winning? The government is protecting the oil companies and attacking the people. So we have to realize that the corporate elite are running the show, and we have to organize people power, because the power resides in us. There's 1%, I learned that 1% that we talk about versus the 99%. Most people think that you have to have $1 million at least to qualify to be in the 1%. That is not even true, which shows how poor we really are. Because the 1%, to qualify to be in the 1%, you only have to have an income or a wealth of about $400,000. And that's what we used to think of as rich, not super rich. But now we have really a fraction of the population running everything, because I think the latest figure I heard from one of the creeps that's a super billionaire was 90 billion. Another I heard had 60 billion. The Walmart family alone, the Waltons probably have, I don't know, God, goodness only knows how many billions within that family, and we could go on. But we have multi-billionaires, and I heard this figure that I couldn't forget. Globally speaking, there are 62 billionaires who own as much wealth as half the global population. The global population is about 7 billion people. So that means about 350 billion people have about as much wealth accumulated as 62 of these obscenely rich billionaires. So that kind of disparity is just unbelievable, but it's real. And we have to do something about it, because the refugee crisis in the world now is horrendous. The rich nations won't take in the poor, and the refugees are fleeing the aggressive wars the Western powers are waging, and making living conditions impossible in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. And Somalia is being attacked. Yemen is being attacked ferociously by Saudi Arabia and the United States. And that's an extremely poor country, but it's strategically located, so they want to take it over. So the bottom line is this country is conducting wars is all over the world, and planning to move on Russia. I mean, it's just unbelievable that they really want to move on Russia and start another war with Russia, because Russia has a hell of a supply of nuclear weapons, and now we have nuclear weapons in Israel, Pakistan, India. I mentioned Russia, the U.S., and Britain, and that's a potential nuclear holocaust. So we do not need a warmonger in the White House, and we better be careful about who we vote for, and we better be careful about what we do individually and collectively, because financially it looks like we're heading for another crash, and all the financial experts project that the next crash will be much worse than the 2008 crash. So, because of course nobody got punished for the crimes, the financial crimes that they committed against the American people. So they're just continuing their gambling spree and doing as they please. And we just heard of the scandal of Wells Fargo and their criminality. So it just goes on and on. So the people have to take the power. That's the best I can say. And yeah, we want to. The lack of a guest leaves me out here kind of on a limb, but anyway, one of the things I will do then, I will go to my political prisoners list and remind you that we still have a lot of people.
Less than a minute.
We have, we are almost out of time. Okay, liberate political prisoners. Mumia Abu Jamal is suffering from hepatitis C. Please send him some love and encouragement. Free them all. Fight the power. Liberate the country. Boycott the election and start the revolution. I'm Kilu Nyasha, and thank you for board hopping Jackie Perez, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in.